Established in 1908 by President Theodore Roosevelt with the help of the newly appointed Attorney General, Charles Bonaparte, the FBI became one of the most well-known legal agencies in the world. In 1908, crime was steadily rising with the emergence of criminal gangs and corruption in business. Roosevelt felt powerless when trying to band together different legal agencies to tackle the issue, and thus the FBI was born. Dealing with federal crimes ranging from murder to money laundering, the FBI has been central to the development of the USA's criminal justice system. Here are 5 of the biggest arrests in FBI history. Number 5. The case of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg remains controversial to this day. They are the first US citizens to have been convicted and sentenced to death for espionage during a time of peace. The pair met in the 1930s at a Young Communist League meeting, and they soon hit it off. By 1939, they'd gotten married and had 2 sons. The pair continued their relationship with the Young Communist League, even though Julius was an engineer for the US Army, based in New York. Julius, of course, kept this quiet from his employer, and began passing secrets around the meetings, which eventually made their way to Soviet spies. Now, Julius was not just accused of being a spy while serving the armed forces. He was accused of leading the spy ring that had been feeding information to the Soviets about the atomic bomb. Not content with just taking Julius down, they also went after his wife, Ethel, who was a staunch communist and had no problems admitting it to whoever asked. She often frequented Communist Party meetings and had affiliations with lots of different Marxist groups in and around New York. When news came to light that 2 US citizens had been feeding information to the Soviets, the country was outraged and called for their heads. At the time, the USA and the Soviet Union had entered the Cold War, and tensions were high. Anyone who was known to have been a communist was immediately distrusted, and most Americans saw communism as the enemy to democracy. In August of 1950, Julius, along with his wife Ethel, was arrested by the FBI and taken into custody. Key witness testimony came from Ethel's brother, David Greenglass. It was said that Ethel's family took a strong disliking to Julius and certainly did not approve of their marriage. During the testimony, David confessed that he too had fed information to the Soviet Union, but in a plea deal only served 10 years in exchange for testifying against his sister. A huge media circus ensued, and many rushed to their defense, claiming that the Rosenbergs had been caught up in mass hysteria, but the court simply ignored it. Dwight Eisenhower, who was president at the time, issued the following statement, saying, "I can only say that by immeasurably increasing the chances of atomic war, the Rosenbergs may have condemned to death tens of millions of innocent people all over the world. The execution of 2 human beings is a grave matter, but even graver is the thought of the millions of dead whose death may be directly attributable to what these spies have done." Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were found guilty of espionage and sentenced to death by the electric chair. They were held in the infamous Sing Sing prison until their execution on June 19, 1953. Number 4. Crimes against indigenous and native people of the United States is certainly nothing new. They are an ingrained piece of US history that many still choose to ignore. The arrest of William Hale in the 1920s was one of the first in the public eye to shed light on the violence against indigenous and native people. It started in May of 1921 when the body of Anna Brown of the Osage tribe was found in northern Oklahoma. Her cause of death was determined to be a gunshot wound to the back of the head. With a lack of evidence or witnesses, her case soon turned cold. Anna was very well liked in the community, and they were left shocked. Who could do something so cruel to someone who was so well liked? The community were trying to come to terms with Anna Brown's case when just 2 months later, Anna's mother died under suspicious circumstances. Throughout the next few years, members of Anna's family would also be murdered, leading the community to become suspicious. Who wanted the Brown family dead, and most importantly, why? It wasn't just members of the Brown family either. Soon, people all across northern Oklahoma were dying. some murdered, and some under suspicious circumstances. It appeared that the community had a serial killer on their hands. At a complete loss with what was happening to their people, the tribal council appealed to the FBI for help. The FBI gladly stepped in, and soon their investigation pointed them towards a man known as the King of Osage Hills. William Hale, as he's better known, controlled most of the Osage's business and ongoings on the reservation. He started off tending to cattle on the reservation, but soon gained more and more control through coercive means such as bribery and intimidation. The more that the FBI dug into William Hale's background and personal life, the clearer it became. His nephew was due to marry Anna Brown, and from the death of the Brown family, Hale would be set to gain head rights, giving him access to $500,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $7,600,000. Over time, FBI agents would one by one join the community and begin to get close to Hale. They soon earned his trust, and his nephew confessed to everything. His nephew, along with a few other tribe members, were the only ones to testify against him, as he'd either paid off or threatened every other member on the reservation. After months and months of undercover work, the FBI agents finally had enough to convict Hale of the murder of Anna Brown and the rest of her family. William Hale was convicted in January of 1929 and sentenced to life in prison. This was one of the first times the FBI had really shown what they were capable of. Following the arrest of the King of Osage Hills, the FBI made it known that they were a force to be reckoned with. Number 3. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, many criminal gangs were formed as people became desperate to earn money. Instead of being able to earn money at work, people had resorted to taking what they wanted by force. Born in Indianapolis in 1903, John Dillinger was a troubled child. He was always getting into trouble despite the strict upbringing he had at the hands of his father. Not interested in school, he began running the streets and causing all sorts of trouble. Eventually, he dropped out of school and got a job, but soon became bored with the monotony of the working class life. Not content with the small town life, Dillinger moved into the city of Indianapolis to find something more exciting. Instead, he became involved with the wrong people and soon lived a life of crime. He was arrested in 1925 for attempting to rob a shop and was sentenced to 20 years for assault and battery, intent to rob, and conspiracy to commit a felony. His co-conspirator only received 2 years for the crime, and Dillinger became very angry. In 1933, he was paroled after he had served just 8 years of his 20-year sentence. It seemed that prison had not reformed Dillinger whatsoever, because as soon as he was released, he robbed a bank in Ohio. He was apprehended for this, but made a great escape from the Indiana State Prison, killing 2 guards in the process. Joined by other notorious gangsters and killers alike, Dillinger and his gang set out on a spree of murders and bank robberies between September of 1933 and July of 1934. The gang made away with thousands of dollars while also claiming the lives of 10 innocent people. He was finally captured by the FBI when he stole a police car and crossed state lines between Indiana and Illinois. The crossing of that state line in a stolen car violated the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act, which was a federal crime, and the FBI were able to swoop in. During the attempt to arrest Dillinger, he was killed by FBI agents who were engaged in a shootout. Dillinger, along with other members of the gang, were shot dead. While not arrested by the FBI, they were happy with the outcome. John Dillinger was now off the streets, and no one had to sit through a lengthy trial. Number 2. Before the US had become involved in World War II, the FBI had already successfully taken down 33 Nazi spies from a group referred to as a spy ring. German-American William Siebold was recruited by the FBI to become a double agent for them. He'd become a US citizen and had worked on airplanes and other industrial companies since 1921. So in 1939, the FBI sent him on a trip to his native Germany, where he would meet with high-ranking German officials under the guise of wanting to become a spy for them. The German Secret Service gave him the fake name Harry Sawyer. complete with the backstory, and told him to travel to the US and work as an engineer. From there, he would meet with other Nazi spies, passing along messages between the two. Over 16 months, 500 messages were passed via radio stations from an agent posing as Siebold and high-ranking Nazi officers. After gathering as much evidence as possible, FBI agents were able to find the leader of the spy ring, named Frederick. Frederick, along with 32 other members, were arrested in connection with espionage against the United States. All members of the group were found guilty and sentenced for their crimes. Their sentences totaled to 300 years in prison, and all before the US had even entered the war. Number 1. Many Americans thought that the days of high-profile bank robberies were over. With the likes of John Dillinger, who we talked about in number 3, being taken off the streets, bank robberies were now a thing of the past. That was until the early 60s when two new faces came onto the scene. Albert Nussbaum and Bobby Wilcoxon. The two had met in an Ohio prison and maintained a close friendship, even when released. Nussbaum was the brains of the operation. He was quiet, reserved, and intelligent. He was able to create plans for many different crimes and would spend his time researching explosives and firearms. On the other hand, Wilcoxon was most definitely the bronze of the pair. Wilcoxon had a violent streak and wasn't afraid to use his size and brute strength to get what he wanted. Over the course of 2 years, the pair robbed 8 different banks and were responsible for the death of one bank employee. Following their 5th robbery, they were placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list, and soon the eyes of the whole country were placed on them. Not fazed by the media attention, the pair committed 3 more bank robberies before going their separate ways. Despite the crimes they had committed together, the friendship didn't work out, and Nussbaum ran back into the arms of his estranged wife. His mother-in-law contacted the FBI, who managed to convince her to help them capture the pair. They were both arrested in November of 1962, and the whole US watched the FBI take away the 2 men who had terrorized banks for the last 2 years. They were both sentenced to life in prison. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.